Well, thanks everyone for being here and for the Cannabis Drinks Expo for having us. I guess we're going to start by just giving our background of who we are and why we're on stage today. So I'll start. I've been a partner with Hinman Carmichael and with the firm for about 9 years. We are known for alcohol beverage law, and I started the cannabis practice in 2015. Similar type of practice, focusing on regulatory law for the industry, compliance, route to market strategy, et cetera. I met Charlie, a while ago. 3 or 4 years ago, and he had such an interesting background. We were able to have some beers together and appreciate the challenges of the cannabis industry. And Charlie, tell them a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm Charlie Cangialosi. I spent almost 19 years in the beer industry, and most of that, like was mentioned, was with Anheuser-Busch, and I did everything in the beer industry. Started out at one of the company-owned distributorships, worked my way through the entire system, from doing everything from key accounts to market manager positions, dealing with distributors, to being chief of staff when the region was 13 Western states, which at that point would have been the 5th largest brewery on the globe. And ended up at the same distributor I started out at as a director of sales and marketing. Well, like everybody at Anheuser-Busch at that point in time, once the company changed hands, I got shown the door. Went to Miller Coors. I was at then a craft brewery in Ninkasi out of Eugene, Oregon. I got a call from a headhunter, said, hey, we got this position. It's a director of sales. The spec read like my resume. I'm like, yeah, I'm in. Who is this? And it turned out to be Kiva Confections, who's the largest edibles company in the state of California. So I got liberated from the beer industry and came to cannabis. And it's like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me professionally, because this is such a dynamic industry, and especially over the last 4 years, how it's changed and grown and moved into the regulated market. So I'm probably one of the few people, that has been on both sides of this industry, as far as adult use products go, from being in beverage and now in cannabis. So yeah, it's been really nice to take the experiences from, growing brands and building brands and selling them in the beer industry, and now applying it here in the cannabis industry across multiple states. So.
And tell us about your current company.
So the current company I'm working for is called Old Pal, and we primarily focus on flower and vape products. And the brand positioning behind Old Pal is like, it's just weed, right? It's a shareable experience, right? Cannabis has this long, long history and legacy of being a shareable communal product and plant. And since Prohibition happened, that has kind of gotten lost, right? And now is what we're seeing in the current industry is there's this rush to be top shelf, right? To grow incredible strains at super high THC percentages and try and maximize your revenue based on that. It's super expensive and people are doing amazing things, but our brand positioning is like, it's just weed, right? It's weed for the people. So we're creating this community and the shareable experience, and we just have price positioned it so it's super accessible to everybody. And we've already grown in the first year of the company to be the #1 flower company in the state of California. We've expanded to Nevada. We're in Oregon, going into Washington, Florida, and there's a few other states on the roadmap. So
excellent. So I think what we're going to do during this session is kind of talk a little bit about the distinctions between cannabis and alcohol, some specifics around drinks, but also just kind of comparing the tools and tactics around sales, marketing, and distribution. And Charlie and I had a discussion before coming here today, and I think the biggest thing that I took away from that discussion is really this. And the previous discussion talked a lot about kind of the access points. But I pulled the on-sale alcohol retail licenses in California, right? So those are the bars and restaurants. As of the 2018, I think it was fiscal year July 2017 to 2018, you see there's 47,000, almost 48,000 of these licenses in California. Compare that with cannabis consumption lounges, which are only in those few jurisdictions. Really, stark differences in numbers there. And then comparing the off-sale alcohol retail licenses in California, again, that's 28,000, and that's not including some of the weird random licenses, but those are just the type 20 and 21, beer and wine, and then beer, wine, and spirits off-sale. And then compare that to the off-sale cannabis retail licenses in California, right? This is a huge difference. So, kind of thinking about the methods of getting to market, this is a pretty huge restriction. So you work in the California market and trying to get into these retailers. How different is it from the experience of working with a huge brewer and the number of retail outlets?
They're very similar, but they're very, very different. And what I mean by that is the similarity is it's really analogous in the cannabis space to that sort of off-premise, independent liquor store owner, because it is really just a single entity that's running their shop. They're completely 100% invested in their four walls, and they're day in and day out, right? That's pretty much the same dynamic within cannabis. We're starting to see a little bit of consolidation behind some of the larger retail operators who are getting multiple units. The one that everybody knows the most about, because they got a really good PR agent, is MedMen, right? So they have multiple units, and they operate more like an organized key account chain account, like a Kroger or Safeway type of entity with a centralized buying unit. But otherwise, it's pounding on doors and walking in and building relationships. The major issue is this difference between the access points. And the other part of the access is the cannabis shops are hidden, right? If you go down to Orange County, you go to Santa Ana, you're not going to drive into a strip mall and there's going to be a Starbucks and a Chipotle and a Bevmo and, People's OC, the cannabis shop. You got to go find it back in this industrial area if you're looking for a new marble countertop or some windows, right? They're squirreled away, and then they kind of are all clustered, right? So the ability for a consumer to just be driving down the street and have to make that choice point of like, oh, I'm gonna get a bottle of wine, or I'm gonna go buy a cannabis beverage, or I'm gonna go buy an eighth of flour because I'm going to a party, just doesn't exist. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face as a cannabis industry, because everybody can do fabulous things with their marketing, and someone made a reference to pull marketing. You can pull all you want, but people can't figure out where to pull it from because they can't find the places. So that's kind of the biggest challenge overall. And that actually happens in a lot of states across the country. Oregon's the one anomaly because they have way too many shops and way too much cannabis to be consumed up there. But like I said, Oregon's an anomaly.
And there is a bill in the legislature right now that in California that would try to expand this a little more. So this bill is basically trying to tie the number of cannabis shops to the alcohol licenses. So that's another interesting one. If you have lobbying teams as part of your company, definitely explore that one because that could be a huge game changer.
Yeah, and just the other really quick point on that is the other thing that's being a really large governor on the regulated cannabis industry is the illicit market. Because especially here in the state of California, where the way the proposition was structured, the state doesn't have necessarily the authority to go into local jurisdictions and shut down the illegal shops. There's spots in the San Fernando Valley where there's one regulated shop and there's 15 illegal trap shops around it. And they're basically selling at a 40% discount to the regulated shop because they're not paying taxes.
Yeah.
So that's another huge issue that the state, especially in California, needs to overcome. It's not as prevalent in a lot of other states, but especially here, which is the largest market and where a lot of brands are going to be innovated, it needs to be addressed and fixed quickly.
Well, and how important do you think is that consumption lounge environment? I mean, especially for, say, drinks and kind of repeating that familiar scenario of a bar.
No, I think that is vital, especially to this category and for the entire industry, because honestly, the Volvo mom and the Tesla dad, just like, yeah, they smoked pot in college, but they haven't interacted with it recently. So if you had some spot where you could go and sample, using air quotes, products like a true on-premise bar experience, but in the cannabis space would be huge, right? Because when we were working in the beer industry, yeah, we'd launch a new brand. We spent a lot of time talking to bud tenders to get them to make those suggestions to consumers. Yep. And they might not like Bud Light Lime. But then, right, that consumer is going to go, give me a Corona, right? You're going to have that immediate feedback loop. Well, in cannabis, you don't have that at this point because you buy something, now it's in the exit bag, you got to put it in the car, you got to go home, now you got to get through the 7 layers of child-proof packaging, and you finally get to it and go, this is not what I was expecting to experience, and now you're just done, right? You're probably not going back to interact with the category anymore. And if you can't do that like you can with an on-premise bar, then it's a huge hurdle to get over. And that's something that everybody in the industry really struggles with, is how to communicate those points of education on what the product is, how you're going to feel when you utilize the product, and what the experience is going to be. So yeah, it's a huge gap that we're all trying to bridge.
All right, I've got just kind of a little list of some of the differences that we talked about. And again, if people have questions throughout, we're casual, easy, just let us know. But we talked about kind of the on-premises consumption issues and the limited opportunities for trial on the cannabis side. I think someone had a question earlier about kind of having that, reliable experience, right? That what a beer is going to do to you. And I think there is a huge education gap with cannabis. I think the other thing that is challenging for cannabis is that it has been approached as a medical product. And so I think consumers are often looking for someone to tell them what it's going to do, right? Tell me how much of this I should take. Tell me what this is going to do for me. Whereas alcohol, there's that period of time when you're young, when you try it out, right? And you see, and everyone's got a story about tequila, or maybe it's vodka, or whatever it is that they're like, that one I don't do, didn't have a good experience. I think when you look at cannabis, there has to be a certain amount of willingness to self-experiment when it comes to cannabis, and I think a lot of consumers are afraid to do that. Has your approach with Old Pal and kind of that let's do it together kind of thing helped a little bit with that, or do you think more brands should be kind of encouraging that group mentality? Yeah,
I think what we're seeing is that creating that communal experience really, it enhances the overall benefit, right, of the plant, because you're now enjoying it with a group of friends like you should be, right? So we actually have this retrofitted 1940s bus that we call the Collider, and at a recent event, we had about 25 people loaded in this thing, and they're enjoying some of our product, and you looked around the bus, and everybody was talking, and not a single person had their phone out. Like, when was the last time that ever happened, right? I'm going to scan across the room, and half the room is staring down at their phones right now. Not casting any judgment there. It's like having dinner.
Actually, it looks pretty good.
Actually, it's like having dinner with my kids. But like that's what we need to encourage in the industry, and we need to get everybody from the regulators all the way down to the local city government officials to understand that, right? We're not going to wash away this 75, 80 years worth of brainwashing that we all went through at the hands of the federal government overnight. And it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of the conversation to make that happen.
And let's talk a little bit about trade education. I know that was something we chatted about too, and kind of, there are lots of tools and tactics available to the alcohol industry to do trade education. In fact, it's pretty unregulated. You can educate trade anywhere. You can, meet with them, talk to them about methods of preparation, taste them on different products. There are provisions for samples. Cannabis, because you don't have that, the retail chains, right? It's individual owners. How have you approached trade education?
So pre-regulation, it was actually a great dynamic because we could go into a shop and set up a table and engage with patients at that point and actually provide them with samples and tell them what their experience was going to be like. So when I was with Kiva Confections, we're an edibles product, we produced sample pouches that gave people the product in a small amount, and we talked to them about what the dosing was and what the experience was going to be. So there's a product called Terabytes. It's a chocolate-covered blueberry or espresso bean. We gave them 3. They're each 5 milligrams. So it was a really simple pitch. It was like, hey, take this, have one, sit back, relax, see how it affects you. If 90 minutes in, you're not really experiencing anything, then the next time you take 2, right? So we help people titrate themselves by doing that, and it really helped that brand get to where it is now because of that one-on-one interaction and explaining to people what they were going to be experiencing. Now, that's completely restricted. So you can't do that anymore. So we still do demos, and we go in and we talk to people about what the product is, the brand positioning, and now we're just swagging everybody to death, right?
Well, and I mean, I feel like Kiva was one of the first to do like the non-medicated products to be able to at least try the quality of the chocolate and experience that. I mean, do you see, what do you see people doing successfully in market? I mean, right, because you don't have, cannabis manufacturers don't have the ability to taste consumers directly. They don't have, they're essentially on the retailer's private property, so the retailer has to be able to decide what they can and can't do. How do you go about educating the bud tenders?
Yeah, now it's really, prior is really consumer focused, right? We're looking for that person coming in the door to try to engage them on making a purchase for us. Now we're spending more time talking to the bud tenders because in the cannabis space, they are the gatekeeper, right? We're trying to figure out how to control that path to purchase because as soon as you walk up to the bud tender, you go, what should I get? You're gonna get what they tell you to get, right? Because people don't have the education on the product. So we're trying to really educate them to be able to educate the consumer that they're standing in front of and get them to ask the consumer like some questions like, well, what's your experience with cannabis? Do you like smoking? Do you like vaping? Have you tried edibles? That whole set of questions really isn't being asked the way it should be. And what our focus is like we're really trying to talk to shop owners about educating their bud tenders so that they bring customers back, right? You don't want to lose that opportunity if you got one shot with a consumer and just like send them away with something that's just going to completely blow their mind, right? Mm-hmm. And I heard that story from a number of friends who, as soon as things went legal, I live like in Redondo Beach, they drove to Orange County, they got like 3/8 of like 28% THC, they got home, they threw it in a pipe, they took one hit and fell asleep for 3 hours, and the rest of those 8 just ended up getting trashed because they're like, it was way too much for them. So.
Or they got too paranoid and are like, I don't like being paranoid, I'm never doing this again.
Right.
Yeah. What about distribution? How is distribution different in cannabis versus the beer industry?
Well, on a sheet of paper, it's essentially the same, right? It's set up in cannabis to be basically the 3-tiered system. The biggest challenge right now for a lot of people that are operating as distribution companies, especially in California, is the infrastructure they need to service this like 500 to 600 shops that are spread across the entire state, right? So the last distributor I worked for at Anheuser-Busch, we had 3,500 accounts in LA along the coast, right?
Wow.
It was a pretty compact area, tough to get around, but we sent out 44 trucks every day and, ran through 666,000 cases a month, right? But that cannabis distributor now has to get to 500 shops in 6 or 7 big geographies, and that's a challenge. The other big challenge is there's going to be this continuing evolution of the cannabis distributors' capabilities to really sell and manage a portfolio of products.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the big challenges, is getting salespeople on the street who know how to sell a portfolio of products and can talk to retailers about managing their category. That's a little bit of a spot in the industry that hasn't quite fully evolved yet. There's some people that are really, really good at it from a retail standpoint that understand what they have on their shelves, but then you walk into other shops and go, why do you have 17 different indicas at $35 an eighth? And you have one sativa? And they're like, what? Like, they don't even realize what they have on their shelves. Yeah. It's like, okay, consumers are looking for different things. There's different use occasions and different price points, and they're like, oh, but it looked really good and the THC was really high. It's like, all right, cool.
Different priorities.
Yeah, so it's evolving, and like I said, people are getting really good at it, and then everybody else is kind of coming along.
Yeah, I mean, I think another challenge I've seen with some of my clients on the distribution side is just accessing the entire state, right? Yeah. They'll have a license in Northern California, and then they're struggling to get into LA, for example, right? It's hard to get licenses there. And so they will do partnerships with other distributors, and it's kind of this awkward patchwork where you just don't have the same reliability that you have with alcohol distributors. But at the same time, I think there's a lot more flexibility where you have distributors that offer anything from just your basic testing and QA testing to a full service, get into accounts and have that, portfolio of brands.
Yeah, and Rebecca brings up a really good point, is the logistical challenges of being a cannabis distributor are huge, because the way the law is written, the local jurisdictions have control, and from the logistics standpoint, you'd love to put a distributor in like Commerce or somewhere in LA so you can get to all the shops, but you can't because there isn't a license available, or the local tax is so onerous, you can't afford to put it there.
Yeah.
So now you have to move someplace else, and now you just shifted costs from taxes to fuel and trucks and wear and tear and that sort of thing. So that's the challenge. So I know a lot of people right now are operating in Northern California, where the local tax rates are a little bit more reasonable in a few cities, and they're doing cross docks down to Southern California. So we're kind of in the cone of silence, but they're just like stopping somewhere off the 5, and all of a sudden a box truck's loading up a bunch of vans that are turning around and going back to do deliveries in LA. Well, one, that's not cool, and two, it's super dangerous. So why are we putting people at risk just because the locals can't get their local permits in place at a tax rate that allows people to survive? So
and what do you think about is vertical integration, which you can do in cannabis in California, versus there is limited vertical integration on the alcohol side, but not in all categories? Do you think that's an advantage and something that, if people are getting into the industry, they want to be vertically integrated, right? There's other states like Colorado that have said, everyone's vertically integrated. What do you think about that element?
I look at that from the consumer standpoint. I think it restricts the consumer's choice. Because if I'm a vertically integrated operator, I'm going to make sure that all of my products are on my shelves. And now, if I'm a consumer walking in and I'm looking for a specific product from a specific manufacturer, I can't go to that shop anymore because of that vertical integration. Mm-hmm. So, we've seen in other states where, especially like Arizona is vertically integrated, there is a broader categories in those shops because they do bring in other people's products. And I think it really does sort of impact the consumer more than it does the operator. So I'm not a huge fan of it because of that point.
Yeah. Within alcohol, we have tight house restrictions that sort of, try to prevent commercial bribery, keep the tiers separate. I feel like there's been a lot of discussion articles lately about slotting fees and kind of the different trade practices, which are, very common in, say, the grocery store environment, but have not been allowed for alcohol beverages.
Right.
There's been a series of federal enforcement actions lately around those kinds of issues. How is the cannabis industry dealing with that? And
I think it's something that a lot of retailers, especially in California, have looked at, and we've seen a really broad spectrum of people presenting slotting fee options. And the biggest challenge that I see in that is that people don't know what the value is of the shelf. So people just pull a number out of their and go, that spot's 10 grand a month. It's like, well, that's a lot of money for that spot. And how many customers are coming into your door now? Like 100. How many came in pre-regulation?
Right.
1,000. Well, okay. Well, I'm not going to spend 10 grand for that spot because you got all these illegal shops around you, right? So that doesn't make sense. And then we got all the way on the other end. It's like I saw a proposal from a retailer that was selling signage spots around the store, and the center TV of the entire shop was the lowest priced piece of real estate in the store. I was like, I'll take that for 5 years, right? I want to lock in that $100 a month for perpetuity, but the ATM was like $1,000.
Interesting.
I was like, okay. It was kind of, I saved that deck. It was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. So let's talk a little bit about CBD and kind of how that is affecting the cannabis industry. Do you feel like that's a legitimate competitor? Do you think it's something that complements the cannabis industry?
I love she asked me these super loaded questions.
Yeah.
CBD as a cannabinoid in concert with THC is amazing, right? And there's some amazing products out there that utilize the full plant spectrum. And I'm a little hesitant to be jumping on the CBD bandwagon with everybody, because it became this sort of it's the secret door into cannabis, and everybody ran into it because the FDA was kind of like, yeah, it's whatever, or DA, where it's fine, right? And now there's just been an explosion of products that are all over the market. And if it's hemp-based CBD, and depending upon how you're ingesting it or utilizing it, I'd just be super careful. So I think my fear is that there's going to be some bad operators out there that
there already are. I
right.
mean, I think the FDA has
they're already
been very concerned about that.
And so I think that's going to be a big detriment to the overall cannabis space, because we're going to have some people jumping in, doing some bad things. The FDA is going to come in, put the screws back down, and then that's going to restrict or slow down the move to the federal government rescheduling cannabis overall.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I've had a lot of my alcohol clients, express interest in CBD beverages, right? And that being seen as, kind of a safe way to get into the market. I think those beverages still have a lot to do to advance to. And I guess I question whether they're a true alternative to an alcoholic beverage.
Yeah, and they're really, I don't think they are, because if you're looking for a CBD beverage versus an alcohol beverage, you're not going to have a similar experience, right? Because alcohol is an intoxicant, right? Everybody knows what it does to you. CBD has no psychoactivity. So yeah, you might relax a little bit, but you're not going to have that experience that the intoxicant gives you. So it's really, it's apples and plums. It's not even apples and oranges. It's so different. So
yeah, definitely. Well, it looks like we have about a minute left. Let's end on what would you suggest for folks that are thinking about getting into the industry, may have some alcohol background. What would you suggest for those folks?
Well, I think it's really what you're looking to do and how you're looking to enter the cannabis space. I tell everybody, regardless of what category that they're looking at, is like if you're coming in, first thing, you need to be super patient because it's going to be years. And two, you better have a lot of capital because it's costly. And if you don't have the fortitude or the ability to be here in 2 or 3 years, then you really should just like throw the money into a mutual fund. Because we're still in such an early stage. It's going to take a long time for us to get to the points of access where people can utilize their innovations and really talk to consumers. And so, yeah, it's like the great part about California is like it's all about innovation. So if someone in this room is sitting with an amazing idea that will really set the world on fire, go for it, but just know it's not going to be an overnight like success. It's going to take a long time, and yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work, and especially even for us, going door to door, pounding on people's doors, like, yeah, I love your product, but I got too much of these already on the shelves, I can't get rid of them. It's like, I'd love to put your product on, but I got to get rid of all this other stuff, right? Yeah. So it's just like slowly.
And what about folks that are interested in working for a company? Do you find that alcohol beverage experience is valuable?
Yeah, no, from someone sitting in my chair as a VP of sales, if there's someone with good cannabis knowledge and also has that sort of up and down the street experience in the beverage world, it's perfect, right? Because you're used to that knocking on doors, getting the Heisman, like, I don't have time to talk to you, they won't come out of the back room, and you just know they gotta keep going back and forth. I think there's also a lot of current companies in the space that could utilize a lot of people with that experience, especially from a management standpoint. The founders of my company are both 28. And the great thing about them is they're great cannabis guys, but they know what they know what they don't know, and they know where we want to go. So the joke is I'm the oldest old pal. And but they listen, right? Because it's this an adult use product, and some of the experiences that I had in the past are 100% applicable to what we're doing, and we just save a lot of time by having that experience.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks. We'll take some questions.
Do now. 2 questions in this format, and then I see we're gonna go there and then there, and then will you guys be in the back for a moment?
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome.
We could talk about this for 5 hours. So.
Yeah. Stop us when you're done. Yeah.
Thank you. Vivian Acer from Cowen. One of the key themes over the last decade in beer has been SKU and brand proliferation with the explosion of craft. So given the innovative nature of cannabis-infused beverages, how do you think about advising around SKU and brand management?
That was to me, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, I think the best thing for people to do is just really find that core product and that core form factor, and just not get crazy if they have a little bit of success going into a bunch of variant form factors. Believe me, I lived through it for a decade at AB. It was just like, well, let's do 9-ounce cans, let's do 8-ounce cans. Let's just like, there's no more space in the shelf, right? We can't just keep pouring Bud Light into a different can or bottle size. So yeah, just find your core and just ride it really, really hard. And then the other thing is don't over skew, because I think we fight this too. It's just like, how many variants do we want to come up with on a vape pen? Like, do we want to do 9 different strain profiles, or is it better to do 4 or 5? I always skew to the lower end of the scale just because of space and getting people engaged in the product.
Well, and I know you study this closely, Vivian, but I think, thinking too about, the overcorrection maybe that's happening within the craft market, that's real. And, I think craft beer in some cases blames cannabis for that change. I think there's a lot of market factors, but I think you also had a lot of excitement about the industry and the growth, and it, may have been too much for consumers.
Yeah, cannabis is IPA or vape pens. Like, it's the easiest barrier to entry. Everybody's rushing in because it's easy. It's easier to extract, put it into a cartridge, and throw it on a shelf. So yeah, that's there's going to be some contraction I see coming in that space too.
Rebecca, I'd be interested in your firm's perspective on federal legislation and time to change and what you predict happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happening with hemp is a really good example. It's been kind of a mess, right? The 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp at a federal level, but you have all these different agencies that are trying to figure out their regulations. I do think with the cannabis industry, we've been working really hard on trying to get ahead of that. But I think it's challenging. You have 3 or 4 different bills right now around federal legalization efforts, and they all kind of focus on very different issues. There's a lot to be dealt with, right? You have, the need to address social equity and the, federal prohibition and criminalization of folks. You have the need to think through states' rights, right? And make sure that the states have the ability to regulate this as they see fit, but also thinking through kind of the larger issues around federal legalization, around having taxation, consistent labeling, all of those things that make it easier to operate in interstate commerce. So I think it's likely that we'll have legalization, in the next 5 years probably, but I think as far as actually getting it to a place where it's reliable, consistent, you know what you're doing in the marketplace, I think it's probably 10 years after that.
We would welcome it right now because we're going to multiple states, and basically every state is a new business entity and a whole new set of regulations and labeling. So now you have to redo all your packaging in every single state. So Nevada has one port regulator who looks at every single piece of packaging and every formula and approves them. And her litmus test for the packaging is you can't use any slang, so she just goes Urban Dictionary, cannabis, and if it shows up on the list from Urban Dictionary and it's on your packaging, you can't use it. So we had weed on our packaging and it got rejected, so we had to redo our packaging completely for Nevada. So those are just some of the other challenges in the cannabis space if you're going to be a multi-state operator.
Yeah, and I just think I've been involved in some of the legalization, subcommittees and working groups and stuff, and everyone has different priorities, and I think it's going to be a challenge to get something that everyone can live with, and something that acknowledges all the work that the states have done. So. I think it's going to be a mess for a while, but I think we're getting to the point where 33 states now have legalized it in some form. It's becoming pretty accepted in the marketplace.
We thought that in 2016.
Yeah.
Too?
Yeah, no, I mean, you certainly see most of the Democratic candidates coming out on this issue. And I mean, I do think cannabis and hemp especially has been a bipartisan issue. I think, it's an industry that both sides see the potential of. But I think there's, the devil is in the details and kind of how the sausage gets made. I think it's going to take a while to get consensus.
My prediction is that the deficit will get them to reschedule because they're going to look for a federal excise tax opportunity because you can't keep raising the debt ceiling, and you got to figure out where you can generate revenue other places. And I think if someone properly packages that positioning to
No,
Congress,
I agree. I mean, I think it has to involve
happen.
federal taxation,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think, that's how we got out of alcohol prohibition, right? Was the Depression.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think that, that component is going to be a major piece of this, which makes it difficult for existing operators that are already dealing with 50% taxes.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Rebecca and Charlie.
Thank you.